Hello, I'm excited to present a special episode dedicated to businessman and visionary philanthropist Julius Rosenwald. In the early 20th century, Julius Rosenwald, a child of German Jewish immigrants, rose to become the president of Sears Roebuck. Influenced by the writings of the educator Booker T. Washington, he joined forces with African American communities during the Jim Crow era to build 5,300 schools, providing 660,000 black children with access to education in the segregated American South. Inspired by the Jewish ideals of tzedakah, which is charity, and tikkun, olam, repairing the world, and a deep concern over racial inequality in America, Julius Rosenwald used his wealth to become one of America's most effective philanthropists. Addressing needs brought about by the Great Migration, Rosenwald also funded the building of housing and YMCAs for African Americans. Recipients of his seminal Rosenwald Fund for African American artists and intellectuals include Marian Anderson, James Baldwin, Ralph Bunche, W.E.B. Du Bois, Katherine Dunham, Ralph Ellison, John Hope Franklin, Zora Neale Hurston, Jacob Lawrence, Dr. Charles Drew, Augusta Savage, and Langston Hughes. The Rosenwald Fund also provided grants to support a who's who of African American artists and intellectuals. Many of the artists I represent and promote, including Elizabeth Catlett, Jacob Lawrence, William Artis, and others, were greatly helped by Rosenwald Foundation funds. But I have personal reasons as well. My mother attended a school in Virginia that was built thanks to the generosity of Rosenwald. It's called Dunbar, and it still exists and is an historic landmark. I'm happy to say my cousins are instrumental in maintaining it and telling the story. Julius Rosenwald died in 1932, but he left an incredible legacy that continues to live on and have meaningful impact to this day. Join us as we delve into this inspiring story. Now, joining me from Virginia, from the very school that my mother attended, which is an historic landmark, is my cousin, Roger Smith. Roger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So I wanted to start by just having you tell us a little bit about just the general history of the school itself. How did it come about, and so on?
This schoolhouse is a Rosenwald schoolhouse. It was the Rosenwald Schoolhouse Foundation was Julius Rosenwald, who was a co-founder, a co-owner of Sears and Roebuck, and he also I worked with Booker T. Washington in setting up a network of schools across the United States, mostly in the South, of underserved communities that didn't have access to education.
Excellent. And this particular school is in, I'm saying, Fluvanna County. Is it considered Palmyra, Virginia?
So this area is considered Palmyra. Back then they would call this whole area the Shores area.
Okay.
The road is named Mountain Hill Road, but it was the Shores area for this schoolhouse. Fluvanna had several Rosenwald schools.
Oh, okay.
So this is one of several, yes.
Yes, and as I understand it, across the South and elsewhere, it was probably over 500 of these schools altogether, as I understand it.
I believe it was more than that.
Even more than that. Okay.
It may have been over 1,000.
Oh, wow. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So in what year did the Rosenwald funds become available and the school get started getting built?
So for this school, it was 1923, and it was a joint effort by the community, the African American community, Julius Rosenwald, and public funds.
Okay.
This school cost around $2,600 to be built, with I think 700 coming from the Rosenwald Foundation, 1,400 from public, and 500 from locally raised from the African American community. And they put all the money together and got the package put together, and the community also supplied the labor to put the Sears and Roebuck schoolhouse package together. So by Julius Rosenwald being co-founder, co-owner of Sears and Roebuck, they had these schoolhouse packages. So they could just order schoolhouses to fit the size that they needed, and they would ship out. It pretty much was a prefab schoolhouse, and then the community had to get together and put it together.
Oh, I see. That's
Yeah,
interesting. So actually, so it was plans, it was the materials, everything was laid out. It was like assembling it is basically what it came down
exactly.
to.
You're actually seeing a similar kind of thing going on with Amazon now, where you can just order a house through Amazon and you can put it together on your property. Sears and Roebuck was doing it back then, and
100 years ago.
exactly, yeah, yeah.
I love
So
it.
Julius Rosenwald, he took advantage of that network that he had to do his philanthropy, but also he was able to be efficient with it because they had the Sears and Roebuck machine behind them.
That's incredible. That makes the story even more interesting for me because he's donating the money, he's creating the incentive, and at the same time they've got the packages already. It kind of
Yeah,
simplifies it in a way too. It's already set up to be
exactly.
assembled and so
That
forth.
that's why across the South you'll see a lot of the Rosenwald schoolhouses. They look very similar.
Ah, okay,
Yeah, I think
fantastic.
this model was, I think it was 18C.
If you were looking up in a catalog, it would be under eight. You would see look for item 18C, and it would be basically the materials for the school.
Right, and it was they. I think they had an east to west attachment, so they knew which way to face the windows because they put big
Ah,
windows in to help take advantage of the uh,
ah,
heat and
light.
when your sun comes up,
Yeah,
it heats the building up early.
I
So
love
that's why you
that.
see a lot of big windows.
I love that. By the way, that's
Yeah,
taking advantage of passive solar energy at a time
exactly,
when it wasn't
exactly.
necessarily a fashionable thing to talk about, kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. Do you know how long it took them to put it together once everything arrived?
From what I understand, the community came together, and it probably didn't take long.
What were his operating years? When did it start, and when did it stop acting as a school for Fluvanna?
From what I understand, it was 1923 to 24 when it was either built or opened, and they ran the schoolhouse all the way up until uh, let's see, it was sold to private owners somewhere around in the 70s.
Okay.
It was a few years after Brown versus Board.
Okay.
And then it was, I think, 4 years after Brown versus Board, the county built Central Elementary School, which was um, the first black, I guess, fully publicly funded elementary school in the county. And then when they built that, um, then they shut down the Rosenwald schools
Okay.
in the county.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got you. It basically acted as a school for all those smaller schools in the various parts of the county.
exactly.
Uh,
And that was the precursor to integration. So the county was supposed to be integrating.
right.
They weren't ready, so they built a black school to try to delay it.
Right.
And then actually, the central school is still being used to this day.
Oh, really? It's
Yeah,
still acting as an elementary school?
exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we should remind everybody that Brown versus Board of Education was decided in, I think it was 1954, I think it was, and in the 50s for sure. And he's saying a few years after that is when and the school probably ended as Dunbar. So yeah. Um, so what else can you tell us about the school? I mean, what prompted? As I understand it, it's you and your parents and others in the neighborhood. The school has been bought in private hands, and then I guess maybe it was just suffering from just sitting there not doing anything. And then you guys come along. When did you guys step in and try to revive the school?
So when we stepped in, the school was in pretty bad shape and what would be considered disrepair. And
Okay.
my mom had a vision for it. She said she had been looking at it for decades and asking about it. One of the first private owners was her uncle, which is my great uncle, Waverly Thomas. He had a machine shop in it, and uh, it was a store at one point.
Ah,
Then it was someone lived in it for a while. It's been quite a few
it's gone through a few
things.
iterations.
exactly. I had another uncle who had ownership of it, and he had ownership with Jerome Booker, who, when he passed, that his ownership went to his wife, and his wife actually is who gave her portion over to my mom, along with
Oh,
my great uncle's family. They signed it over just because the building was in such disrepair.
okay.
They didn't want to keep paying taxes on a building that
Sure,
was deemed to be unusable.
sure.
So they said, Carmen, if you want to do something with it, they
Go
just
for it.
signed their portion over to it, and so she was able to start with her investment just in repairing the building and didn't have to worry about the cost of acquiring it.
Okay. Well, that helped out a lot for sure. That's
A lot, a
yeah,
lot.
that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
I just know from knowing you guys and talking with you in the past, you yourself are actually chipping in your labor to try
Oh
to
yes,
get everything
uh,
squared away.
a
It's no
lot of
small
sweat
task.
equity. A lot of sweat equity. Mom's come out of her pocket with probably over six figures to put into the repair and sweat equity, and we've done wonders in restoring the building.
Well, I've seen it.
Most
It's been a couple of years now, but I've seen it, and that you were in the earlier stages of doing what you ended up doing, and even then, it was a huge improvement. The other thing I admire is that you guys were able to save and preserve some of the old documents. I mean,
yes,
I get chill bumps now even talking to you about it because your mom sent me a document with a roster that had my mother's name on it, and
right.
she was a student at that school, and to see that was just really special. And the fact that you guys were able to save that and preserve it was pretty incredible. And
Oh yeah.
this particular roster, as I recall, was from 1934 to 35. My mother was born in 22, so she was only 12 or 13 or so.
Yes,
Yeah. So anyhow, that was fantastic. I think my Aunt Mary, my mother's next oldest sister, also went there. Do I have that right?
yes,
And then
yes.
your grandfather also went
And
there.
my grandfather. And this is before the days of school buses, so they had to walk. And
Literally, yeah, exactly.
yeah, literally.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you're talking miles to get to school.
absolutely. And in the
Yeah,
wintertime too, when it's kind of cold,
it,
it's not necessarily
it,
an easy walk.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they had to leave early enough not to be late because being late was not allowed.
Ah, see, yeah, yeah. So that's the thing I wanted to ask. Are you able to kind of piece together a picture of what it must have been like? I mean, obviously, walking to school was one aspect of it. Once they got there, do you have a sense of what they were faced with? How they managed to get some instruction and learn the basics?
Yes, from my understanding, the boys and girls were generally kept separated. Even during recess, they had the boys play on one side of the schoolhouse and the girls play on the other.
Ah,
And then it covered the range of grades, and the older kids helped the younger kids. And as they grew, everybody would pitch in with the education.
I think that's great. You know, the old saying, "It takes a village to raise a child." This is like an
Exactly.
actual implementation of that very
Oh yeah.
phrase. Yeah. And so, what else can you tell us about the school? How much were you able to preserve in terms of the early documentation? Any photographs and things like that of what it looked like way back in the day when it was active as a
Um,
school?
we have a couple photographs. Um, During the restoration, Dad actually found some old desks,
Oh,
broken desks that they was kind of got tossed in the woods when it
yes,
broke,
yes.
and he was able to kind of
Restore them.
restore the desk,
Oh,
uh, welded some of the metal back together and put wood to them,
oh,
and
wow.
so some of the desks are original to this schoolhouse.
Oh, that's fantastic. And how
Uh,
about any of the textbooks and things like that? Were you able to recover any of those?
no textbooks. The rosters were the biggest thing that was saved because they had been archived,
Uh huh.
and we were able to go to the archives and get a lot of the roster information.
Okay.
But it's a lot of names and a lot of community history in those names because a lot of people didn't even realize that their relatives went to the schoolhouse
Oh, no
or
kidding.
went to the Rosenwald schools in general in the
Ah,
area.
and so that actually leads me to the next question. So, how does the community feel about? First, do you have a sense of what the community felt like when the Rosenwald funds, everything started pouring in, and this began the construction, or I should say, the assembly of the building began and then as it was operating as a school? Do you have any sense of what the community response was? What impact do you feel it had on the community, and does it have now?
It had a great impact. It was a point of pride that the kids had a place to go to be able to learn. Because beforehand, you, there was nowhere. The county was not providing any
Anything?
kind of education
Yeah.
to the students. If kids learn to read, they actually learned from the, I guess, parents or grandparents of the freed slaves who came off of the Bremo plantation, because uh, the Bremo plantation actually taught their slaves to read.
Oh.
So those slaves, when they were freed, they were able to become kind of teachers
Ah.
to some of the kids in the community.
Uh-huh.
But that was the only way that a lot of information was allowed to trickle into the Black community. Because if you can't read, you can't
You're lost.
you can't get information in or know what's going on in the county or in your community. Or so
Yeah.
it's really important. If you get the newspaper
You don't know what
and
the hell's going on.
you can't read it, it's not going to do you much good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that Bremo plantation, that was in Fluvanna County?
Yes. So John Hartwell Cock was the owner of the Bremo plantation, and most of the members of the Black community at that time came off of that plantation. He gave a lot of them land around the plantation so that he would still have access to them
Oh.
after they were freed.
Uh-huh.
As I'm not sure if they were paid at the time, but maybe even just indentured.
Right. The
Um,
whole sharecropping thing, right?
exact sharecroppers, exactly.
Yeah.
But he still had access to the people who helped build his plantation.
I see.
But one good thing about the people that came off of his plantation is they were taught how to read
Yes.
on the plantation, so they were able to kind of have a leg up
That's
when they
so
were.
unusual, right? I mean, normally the plantation owners were against the slaves learning how to
Oh,
read.
exactly.
So that's
He
pretty.
was actually, is an old story that he was beat up in Fork Union when some of the other local plantation owners heard
Ah,
that he taught his slaves to
ah,
read. He was
he suffered.
assaulted.
He was
Yeah,
assaulted for that. Wow, that's
exactly.
incredible.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
yeah.
Do you know if any of his descendants are still in the area?
Well, we are descendants of.
Well, I mean, of the plantation owner
Oh, yes, the same family still owns the plantation
to this day.
to this day.
Uh,
It was set up in some kind of uh, land deed trust from England
oh,
that had to stay in the family, and to this day, the Cox family still owns the plantation.
oh,
It's split into three pieces, but it's still all three pieces are owned by the family members.
oh, no kidding. Okay. And is there any interaction between the Black community and the descendants of the Cox family?
Yes, there's a slave graveyard on the plantation, and an old chapel site that they allow descendants to come and visit and clean up the graveyard. And
Oh,
some community workers, including me, I've worked part time on the old plantation myself. Was called Bremo Trees now.
oh, no kidding.
Yes.
Do you know what was the crop, by the way? What was the cash crop? Was it sugar, cotton, tobacco?
So they generally did food, corn. I'm not sure if they did soy back then. General Koch did not believe in tobacco or alcohol,
Ah,
so he avoided anything that could go toward that.
okay.
Yeah, he was a what they call a temperist back then.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and so his slaves also had it a little easier, if you can call it easier, because they didn't have to go through the tobacco issue. Some of the tobacco plantations were pretty harsh.
That's what I understand. And the crop itself was
It,
pretty brutal it
exactly.
was hard on the land. It was hard on the people that had to
And hard on the
cultivate
people
it.
that had to deal with it.
Yeah.
I think corn was
The
one
main
of
one?
the big corn, and I'm not sure if they did soy then, but I'm not sure 100% sure what the cash crop was.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I'm just curious, do you happen to know, because I know my brother and sisters and I have always wondered how my grandparents got the property they got. It was over 100 acres. And do you know if the plantation that was part of the Bremo plantation at one time, or?
It's close enough to be part of the land that was given,
Oh, okay.
because it's and from where the plantation sits and the family property sits, you're looking at probably less than a mile
Oh,
from where the
okay.
crow fly. It's probably connected.
Oh, okay.
You cross uh, the highway and you go maybe, oh, you're probably looking at a couple hundred yards and you're on the Bremo plantation.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's super
Yeah.
close. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it was probably part of that handout of property to the slaves, and it was hundreds of acres that he gave to his free slaves.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, fantastic.
It was
So
a 7,000 acre plantation, so you imagine the outskirts of that could be
pretty
quite
wide.
large.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the programs currently being operated there at the school?
So right now we run a STEM program where my mother, she works for Northrop Grumman, and she partners with them and they send people out. We teach them to kids in the area that come out. We also have started some new programs. We just had a health fair where we had the people from the local health department and a lot of different agencies in the area come in, and they did blood pressure checks. They did flu shots. We had a masseuse in for stress relief.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah, it turned out to be a real nice program. She runs one side as a community building, and the other side of the building that she has set up as a museum.
I love it. So here's something that was initiated by Julius Rosenwald to help the African American community. It was built in 1923, over 100 years ago, and it's still actually providing support and services to the community.
Yes,
That's
and
like the
we
gift that keeps giving. I love it.
keeps on giving. My mom's pretty dedicated, and she's gotten partnered with some other people that are pretty dedicated to helping some of the underserved people in the community, and we're making some moves now.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, if there's anybody out there that might be interested in learning more about that particular school and maybe even wanting to contribute, is there like a website, or is there some sort of way to connect with you guys? How would they do that?
So right now we have the email set up is Dunbar School 1923 at gmail.com.
Oh, okay.
And we also have a Facebook page, Dunbar Schoolhouse on Facebook.
And that's what
That,
it's called. It's Dunbar Schoolhouse. That's the
yes,
okay. And can you say the email address one more time?
Dunbar School 1923 at gmail.com.
Well, I got to tell you, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us more about the Dunbar Schoolhouse. It was very personal to me, since family members and your family as well attended there, so it was especially pertinent for me. But also to highlight the good done by Julius Rosenwald to initiate this thing and use his resources and his expertise and his connections and those plans that were available.
Yeah,
it's just remarkable, and it should be amplified. And what a perfect example, I think, for us even in this modern day. But to hear that you're still doing these wonderful programs, the STEM program, even bringing in a masseuse, it just warms my heart. Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. So I want to thank you. And your mom, by the way, is Carmen Smith. Your dad is Stanley Smith, for those out in the audience that are listening and viewing. And this is Roger Smith. Roger, thank you so much again for joining us on Eric's Perspective and sharing with us your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Now, joining me from Washington, D.C. is filmmaker Aviva Kempner. Aviva has been making award-winning documentaries for more than 40 years, with an emphasis on rediscovering and celebrating lesser-known Jewish heroes. Her film, Rosenwald, a remarkable story of a Jewish partnership with African American communities, is a feature-length historical documentary about businessman and philanthropist Julius Rosenwald, who partnered with Booker T. Washington and African American communities to build over 5,000 schools in the Jim Crow South. Aviva, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it. We're going to be talking about Julius Rosenwald, but before we do that, if you don't mind, can Can you just tell us briefly about yourself? Where were you born?
I was born in Berlin, Germany after the war. My mother was a Holocaust survivor. My dad was with the US military.
So is that where you were raised as a child, or did you
Uh,
come to the States shortly after?
just be under 4 years old, I was living in Berlin and then in Munich. And then we moved to Detroit. Actually, I just made a film about my mother and my uncle's experiences before and during the war,
Ah,
and then afterwards, called Pocketful of Miracles.
oh, excellent.
And so I grew up in Detroit, went to University of Michigan, and have lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 50 years, where unfortunately we don't have statehood. I'm a real activist on that issue.
Well, I was actually born in D.C. and
Oh,
yeah,
really? Oh, I think you told me that.
yeah,
Right.
and I was probably your age, 4 years old. You mentioned 4 years old. That was how old I was when my parents moved to it wasn't even the suburbs. It was rural Maryland in Montgomery County. But anyhow, so you mentioned your uncle in the documentary. Was that, I'm assuming they were persecuted during the Nazi era. Is
Yeah,
that?
my mother was blonde and green eyes, so she passed as a Polish Catholic and worked in a slave labor camp within Germany. My uncle was deported with their sister and parents to Auschwitz, and only my uncle survived.
Oh, wow.
It's really a story of survival and making it in America and still having an optimism. My mother became an abstract painter, and my uncle, a businessman who was very involved in helping different religions. And I mean, the title of the film, Pocketful of Miracles, is something he says in his testimony of the Shoah Foundation. And actually, neither of them hardly talked about the war at all, and both have passed. And that's when, a couple of years, I decided to make the film to counter Holocaust denial, which is much more rampant now. So
Yeah,
I'm
it's kind of a horrible thing to even consider that someone could try to deny that horrible
right,
situation occurred in Germany during that time. It's terrible.
right.
But so, how did you become interested in filmmaking, just in general? Can you trace it back to your first?
Well, yeah, actually, on Sundays, my mother and I used to watch old movies, dramatic movies.
Yes.
And I always loved it. And when I was doing human rights work, mostly in undergrad, but also I came to Washington to go to law school. We often would use film as a way to educate people, raise money. And I did very well in law school. I was an immigration lawyer, but I don't do well on multiple choice questions. So when I went to take the bar, I actually flunked it twice. So I always thank the DC bar for flunking me, or I would probably be an immigration lawyer for the last 45 years. So I decided I had to look elsewhere, and I just had this epiphany that I had to go make a film about Jews fighting Nazis. And that was the first film I worked on. I produced Partisans of Vilna.
Oh, excellent. So that's the title, Partisans of
Vilna. And then from there, I heard that Hank Greenberg died, who was a Hall of Famer, big home run hitter for the Detroit Tigers, which I grew up, but I always heard about him from my dad. And the height of domestic anti-Semitism, Hank went to synagogue instead of playing in a very important game. Actually, it'll be 90 years ago this fall. So I made The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg. Then I made a film about Gertrude Berg, who played Molly Goldberg, which was the first television sitcom. And then I made Rosenwald, and we'll talk about that.
yes.
And back to another baseball player, Mo Berg, who was a catcher as well as a spy. And then I, with others, made a film called Imagining the Indians, the Fight Against Native American Mascotting, because I had been in Vista and done a lot of work with Native Americans, and I was approached to work on the film, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And then I finished Pocketful, and now I'm finishing a film on Ben Hecht, who's a very, very incredible screenwriter. sort of, Godard said he developed 80% of the different kind of scripts we have. And he got very involved in the 30s, late 30s and early 40s to try to save European Jewry, and then also establish Israel. And so that's what I'm working on finishing. It's, if you were to see my desk right now, which is actually my dining room table, you know, when you have to decide what stays in the film and what doesn't. So
I can only imagine. By the way, you mentioned one of the folks you mentioned that you did the film about was a spy. Was that during World War II? I was just curious.
yeah, Moberg, right?
Oh,
Who you would never in today's world, because of, you know, what you can see on the internet, and someone who actually played baseball and then was a manager also be a spy, because people, you know, there'd be so many visuals of him. But yeah, he worked in Europe. He also did possibly some work when he was doing these exchange programs in Japan before the war started. So quite a brave, eccentric man. He worked with the OSS, which was our spy organization during World War II,
yes.
precursor to the CIA.
Yes. Well, the focus of our talk is going to be Julius Rosenwald, and I just thought maybe as a starting point, perhaps you can explain to our audience who Julius Rosenwald was.
Right. He was born in the 1800s, grew up in Springfield. Coincidentally, when you realize later on in his career, his family's house in Springfield was kitty corner to where Lincoln had been.
Oh my goodness.
The family had started out as peddlers, but then became merchants, and then the family moved to Chicago. And he, with a relative, got involved in Sears and Roebuck. Now, I think young people today might not know what Sears and Roebuck is, but it was a very important store, which actually was a precursor to Amazon, in that you could order things through a book, through a catalog.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the role model later on that Amazon established. In any event, he was very motivated by his rabbi, Emil Hirsch in Chicago, who would preach about, you know, justice and tikkun olam. This is a principle in Judaism, repairing the world. And he really heard that, and he became very wealthy, but he didn't feel comfortable just spending all the wealth on himself. He got very involved in philanthropy. And the thing that really impressed him so much was meeting Booker T. Washington, who at that time was running Tuskegee.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was go visit Tuskegee and got involved. He gave some charity to Tuskegee. And then when he turned 50, he decided to give different projects all over the country that he was involved with. He also had given money for the Black Wise, because at that time that he was in Chicago, as well, other major cities in the North, a lot of African Americans, the Great Migration was happening.
Yes.
Because it was so bad in the Jim Crow South. So in any event, he got in, he asked Booker T. Washington, well, what do you want? You know, for my 50th birthday, I'm giving people money. And Booker T. Washington said, you know, our local schools are so bad here, you know, in Alabama. Can you help the schools? So he gave grants to those schools. And then he got very involved, thinking, yeah, let me help, you know, build more schools. And from that 4 came 5,000 schools, all in the rural South. And these were schools that the communities were very involved in. First of all, the African-American families themselves still paid state taxes and Rosenwald's, I think, genius in giving was matching grants. He would give a certain amount and the communities would match it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they would have, you know, sell food and have fundraisers. So they really felt invested. Plus they realized these are a lot of the people who, you know, had been slaves, the descendants of that. They realized that education was a key. It's very funny in the film, Maya Angelou talks about what it meant. They were so proud of graduating from the schools. Representative John Lewis went to a Rosenwald school himself. I was able to interview him for the film. Eugene Robinson, who you'll see on MSNBC and as a columnist for the Washington Post, also went to a Rosenwald school from South Carolina. So it was all about, self-empowerment in terms of the schools. Now, what's happened in today's world is a lot of those schools went, and the irony is, once desegregation, and we just celebrated, what is it, the 50th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yes.
And kids could go to all the schools. Sometimes they didn't get a better education. They did better in the Rosenwald schools. But a lot of the schools just weren't used in, the community. Oftentimes the church would give the building or they'd build it from scratch. And that was actually something else that Booker T. Washington was involved in, because the schools themselves were designed sort of a green architecture. The windows were built so the sun would come in, and principles like that.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, there's a whole movement now to restore the schools as community centers. It's really wonderful. If you go to the what's called the national, the Organization for Historical Preservation.
Yeah.
They have a whole project to help restore the Rosenwald schools. And again, you'll see the community working anything they could. And people might know the name of Valerie Jarrett. Her great-grandfather designed the schools. Again, out of Tuskegee. It was interesting because Sears developed these kid houses, and Rosenwald and Booker T have become really good friends. And Rosenwald said to Booker T, well, you should use the kid houses. And they had a very strong architecture department at Tuskegee, produced the first Black architects. And he said, no, we want to design them here. And it was that prototype of the schools that kept on going. And the interesting thing is, unless you're from the South, had you heard about the Rosenwald schools before? Okay.
Yes. My mother actually and her siblings went to a Rosenwald school in Palmyra, Virginia.
They had originally come from the South and then moved to Detroit.
Actually, no, my mother was born in Virginia and raised there. And the same thing with her siblings. They ended up later on during the Great Migration, or shortly afterwards, they migrated north for better opportunities. But their roots were there in Palmyra, Virginia, and they went to the Rosenwald School called Dunbar.
Right. And that's actually why usually people know about the Rosenwald schools, because someone had gone to them. So I was on the Vineyard years ago, and there was a speech about Blacks and Jews, and it was going to be Julian Bond, who I'd long admired as a civil rights leader,
yes,
and Rabbi David Saperstein, who I knew from Washington, also very involved, justice issues. And what was great is when Julian Bond talked about Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. And then I realized that's the film I have to do, the whole relation, an earlier relation, because I thought it was just going to be the civil rights era between Blacks and Jews.
Yes.
And as I said, Rosenwald also gave money to Ys that were being developed, Black Ys, very much to address the issue of both housing and activities for Blacks who were coming up in the Great Migration. And there was also very crowded conditions in Chicago because of that.
Yeah.
So he built the Michigan Garden apartments, which Valerie Jarrett's, she grew up in, her father ran it or was involved in it. And the other program that Rosenwald was very involved in, and the Rosenwald Fund, is to give to young, aspiring African-American artists. And, Jacob Lawrence's series, The Great Migration, half of which is at the Phillips and half at MoMA, was funded by the Rosenwald Fund. And then you have someone like Augustus Savage, who was taught art during the Harlem Renaissance. And there's actually a show, I think it's still at the Met. A lot of the artists in this show, Harlem Renaissance at the Met, were funded by the Rosenwald Fund.
Yeah.
And when Augustus Savage, one of which was Augustus Savage, who was asked to submit a sculpture for the World Fair in New York in '39.
Yes.
He came up with this incredible statue called the Harp.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm
Yeah.
very familiar with that image, by the way, and I had a few in my gallery. There were only a handful of those, the smaller ones, as you mentioned. There's only a handful that are known to exist because the big one that she made, unfortunately, I think got destroyed. It wasn't
Can
preserved.
you imagine? I'm the daughter of an artist. She finished the show. It was praised to the skies. She could not afford to take it back,
Uh,
and she destroyed it.
that's sad. It breaks my heart, because as you say, you're the daughter of an artist. You know how it is. Most artists regard the works that they create as almost like their children.
So what I've done, there's several of us who've been working on it. People who've been writing about her. I wrote an essay that was in the New York Times, saying we talk about taking down sculptures that are insulting, especially with links to this people who were involved with the Civil War or slavery.
Yes.
Well, how about restoring the statue? And the National Trust and the Ford Foundation did a study. So hopefully, I really have to contact the Ford Foundation. Hopefully, they'll put money into restoring it. And I'm
Hope
hoping
so. Yeah.
to have it again in New York. I always thought it would be great to have it here at the African American Museum in Washington and back where she lived. But
Absolutely.
that's one of the saddest stories ever.
It really is. It just thinking about it really makes me sad. And it had, as I recall, two different titles of the harp, but also Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is like an
Well,
anthem.
she based it on the song.
Yeah.
They're singing in the sculpture.
Yeah.
So
Yes. And it's funny, the first time I ever heard about Julius Rosenwald was through my mother, having attended a school and where she grew up. But the second time was when I opened my gallery in 1988. The first exhibiting artist was Elizabeth Catlett. And
she
I know
wrote
that
all.
she created her wait a minute, the I Am the Negro Woman series as a direct result of a grant from the Julius Rosenwald Fund.
Right.
Yeah, that was
It was an incredible, and Gordon Parks, when he was just starting out as a photographer,
yes,
took out a grant.
yes. And you
Um,
mentioned the Ys. I just want to be clear for everybody in the audience that that's like the YMCA and the YWCA. Is that what you were talking about earlier?
right, right.
Because I know that Gordon Parks even talks about benefiting from the YMCA, where he was too.
And I have people in the film that say that too. Yeah, I mean, Julian Bond's father and uncle, which is why he's wanted to talk about it. That day I heard him and continues to, and he's great in the film. Benefited, they got it. They got grants as scholars. I mean, I think a lot of ways, the Rosenwald Fund was a basis of a lot of present day philanthropy. The whole premise of matching grants and helping artisans. We have several grants like the Guggenheim grant
Mm-hmm.
that have that as a basis.
And I also like that what you said earlier, the other aspect of it, the self-empowerment. I know that my cousins were explaining how, in addition to the matching funds aspect, at least in their particular community, they actually physically put together the building. They were literally hammering nails and sawing boards and so forth to actually create the building in the first place. And let me just quickly add that you talking about the restoration. So my relatives in the Virginia area that still stayed there are involved in restoring that particular school that my mom went to and my uncles and aunts. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, I was just brought to Aberdeen, Mississippi to talk and show the film. And who organized people who live in the North whose families had gone but want the legacy to continue. And that's often happened, and even though maybe people left during the Great Migration,
Yes.
but remember when they were young, they and their descendants are doing the work. It's called the National Trust for Historical Preservation.
The National Trust for Historical Preservation. Okay.
Yeah. So they have a whole division on restoring the schools.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that most people come out saying, especially Northerners and white and black themselves, saying, my gosh, I've never heard about this.
Yeah.
So, that makes me as a filmmaker feel really good that I was able to restore this legacy of a story that people didn't know.
Well, I want to thank you for doing that. Actually, it's very personal to me in multiple ways. But what you've done is to tell the story that, as you just said, a lot of people don't even realize, not even a lot of people in the African American community, especially. So, I'm grateful to you. Let's say the title of your film about Julius Rosenwald. Can you tell us what the title is?
It's just Rosenwald.
Just Rosenwald. I love it. Simple and direct. And how can people see the film?
There's two ways. They can order a screening, and that's from uh, or order, they can buy a DVD, which also has like 30 bonus features.
Oh, okay.
And another person who got a Rosenwald grant was Marian Anderson.
Oh my goodness.
She was in Europe. She was really discovered, and she came back, and that story is in the film.
Excellent, excellent. Because for those who may not be aware, she's obviously famous for her talent, but that whole incident with the Daughters of the American Revolution not allowing her to sing.
That story in the film.
Yeah, and Eleanor Roosevelt intervenes and she sings on the steps of is it Lincoln Memorial? Do I have that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a fabulous story of triumph, developing herself as an artist, just given the opportunity is what was necessary.
Well, Augusta Savage had applied to study in Europe, and she got the grant, and then they realized she was African American, and then they denied it to her.
Oh, wow.
With the Rosenwald grant, then she was able to go to Paris and study.
That's incredible. That's
It's
incredible.
just the racism was so insidious back then.
Well, it's funny because I recently had my two daughters. So on my father's side, he was from Louisiana, and he passed away as a result of my grandfather actually passed away as a result of a horse riding accident. He was originally buried in Louisiana, but then the floods came, and then my grandmother tried to move him to a graveyard in Natchez, but even graveyards were segregated. Black people couldn't be buried in the same cemetery as white people. So they had the community got together, bought a plot of land, and started burying their dead there. It was just kind of an incredible thing to see the extent to which racism and segregation went to absurd levels, it seems to me. Yeah.
Right.
Can you tell us a little, another aspect of the Rosenwald Fund was that it only was designed to last a certain length of time. Is that right?
He believed in this theory of spending down.
Yeah.
It basically is that, the Ford Foundation and other foundations have gone on, but he closed it after a certain number of years. What's nice is several family members in their own capacity have continued to be very generous and involved in philanthropy.
Oh.
But Rosenwald, for I think more personal reasons than anything, just thought the foundation should last a certain amount of time. What's good is its principles have inspired other foundations, and other ones follow it. So that's good.
And the fund outlived him, right? He passed away in the 30s. Am I right about that? Or when you went to Mississippi, was there anything else that jumps to mind as a result of that experience?
Well, it's funny because I had always gone to, because I grew up always saying MISSISSIPPI.
Right.
For some reason they came to school. Well, it was just interesting. It was Aberdeen, Mississippi, to hear people, talk about how important the schools were to them and how they they still very much keep in contact with each other.
Yeah.
people who have gone out of schools. It's sort of like a show of a badge of honor, for lack of a different word, expression. And, I think, again, the people I interviewed who are involved in restoring the schools, oftentimes they moved on to other places, but after they retired, they came back, or their children have come back to try to restore and make the schools.
I just think that's such a beautiful thing. The sense of community. What you said about Augusta Savage being denied after they figured out she was African American, and then Rosenwald comes in, and if it weren't for that grant, she probably wouldn't have been able to study in Paris. And
Right.
the numbers, I know the folks that do a great job with me producing this podcast were telling me 660,000 individuals benefited it from the education
Right.
provided
Yeah,
by
you
these.
get to that number, right.
Yeah, so that sheer number is just incredible at a time when opportunities were limited is probably a generous term. It was probably not even available.
And it's interesting because there's some economists, one of which I interviewed, and I used it, I think, for the bonus feature, who study economically how things can happen.
Yeah,
And in the communities where the schools were, people's income increased. I mean, we all know what education helps with.
sure, sure.
So just even like that, in
Right.
terms of what it did.
And a sense of pride too, I would think, just in the accomplishment of achieving the education, the accomplishment of putting these schools together to the extent they participated in that. I just think
Right.
it's just immeasurable. I'm so grateful to you for telling us a story about Julius Rosenwald, and of course,
It was nice because then I became good friends with Julian Fund and his wife. But thank him, he's the one I heard, and he completely
oh, for sure.
inspired me to make the film. When you hear a story like that and just say, oh, you've got to do it.
Yeah. Well, for sure. We're grateful to him and all the others that came before us in the civil rights movement to make it so that we have the ability to stand on their shoulders and achieve things that perhaps were unachievable earlier.
Well, and I was just saying another story that I have in the film that, that people might know about, the sleeping car porters.
Oh, yeah.
Oftentimes, they were African American and people were going north, and they're the ones that would bring the black newspapers down to tell people in the South, blacks in the South, what was happening up north, and were a real inspiration for them to leave. And I mean, that was something else that I learned in making the film that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there's a couple of different artists that I represent that focus on those Pullman borders that were so crucial,
Right.
as you just mentioned. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. So one more time, can you tell anybody who wants to see the film, is there a website you want to give?
Yeah,
Or
okay, it's rosenwaldfilm, one word.org. Go on that and you can order the DVD. Now, people say they don't have DVDs anymore, but hopefully they're able to do it. I am going to work on trying to get a streaming deal, and then there's also ways you can rent the film.
okay.
And I'm available to come speak, with transportation and a speaking fee, or it depends which community. I mean, I'm hoping it's something that will be in the curriculum, like all my films will be, shown a lot in schools. There's they can buy it for educational purposes.
Okay. And if someone were interested in having you come speak, would they be able to arrange that through the website you just cited?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so I would definitely strongly encourage viewers and listeners to pursue either getting the DVD or arranging to have you come in and talk. That would be fabulous and beneficial to everyone. And but before we go, also, you mentioned I just want to give a plug to the other films you're working on. There's one that you're presently working on. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I'm Ben Hecht. We don't have a final title.
Don't have a title yet, but it's something for everybody to look forward to.
In the future, benhechtfilm.org. I do have a website.
Oh, okay. benhechtfilm.org, everybody.
And then pocketfulofmiracles.org. And then what we should do is we should work on, you inspire me to get back to trying to do something about Augusta Savage.
Oh my
Get
goodness. And
That's restored.
absolutely. And if there's anything I can do to help, I would
Okay.
be happy
Let
to.
me finish this film and then I'll try to get back to it. There's some people I recently met who also are trying to do it. They restored a statue of Eleanor Roosevelt in New York, or they had one put up. So I said to them, this is a perfect project for you all. So maybe I'll try to get you all together.
For sure. I mean, I would definitely get behind the effort to restore that lift every voice and sing to its original size and so forth. That would be a fabulous thing and a
I
benefit.
also thought it'd be great at Obama's library.
Ah, yeah, there's absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time on this Saturday morning to talk with us, and
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And once again, everybody, don't forget to visit those websites and get the DVD at a minimum, and stay tuned.
And could you send me a follow-up email saying you're interested in working on it, and I'll put it all in one email, in one Word doc,
For
so I know
sure.
how to get people together. Okay.
For sure. I will definitely do that shortly after we conclude this talk. I will send you that email, and again, look forward to collaborating on that. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, we need a lot more Rosenwalds and Booker T. Washingtons in the world. That's for sure.
Especially, it seems almost like I hate to say this, but it's almost like we've regressed a little bit. So I think we need a little extra energy.
Yeah,
Right. Exactly.
that's another whole discussion, right?
It's another whole discussion. Exactly. But in the spirit of Julius Rosenwald, he's an inspiration to me too. I think we should all collaborate and try to make a positive impact on society. So thank you again. And everyone out there, please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot.